Oh, hi. You've caught me doing one of the laziest video intros I've ever done, just reading comic books on camera. But we're talking about comic book horror movies in the horror movie syllabus today, so it seems appropriate. Hey everybody, welcome back to the horror movie syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what the horror movie syllabus does. But in short, what we do is look at a particular subgenre of horror and then take a look at 3 movies from that subgenre. Today we're talking about comic book horror movies, which is admittedly a bit of a niche subgenre in that there's not a ton of them and they don't tend to be the most mainstream of movies. Now, for those of you that are fans of things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that might be a little bit surprising to you because those are extremely popular movies. They do very big box office, make a lot of money, have a lot of fans. But it hasn't always been the case that comic book movies have been super popular. In fact, they didn't really start to gain mainstream popularity till the 1970s, which, as you'll note, is squarely in our horror movie syllabus timeline of modern horror films. So it kind of works out pretty good for us. Now that said, it's hard to find good horror comic books, period, and then good movies based on those horror comic books is even harder to find. So that's part of the struggle with this subgenre, what makes it kind of feel a little bit like a niche subgenre. But I do think there are some real gems. I think there are some movies that wind up being a lot of fun, if maybe not always super true to their source material. And that's one of the things we're going to look at today is that horror comics, it's hard to translate horror into the printed page, especially comic book style. But it's really hard to take that translation and turn it back into a movie, or at least it seems to be the case, because a lot of the movies that we will talk about today don't really adhere all that closely to their source material. They tend to diverge from a little bit to a lot. And that's an interesting thing. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it does seem to me that maybe horror comics are hard to translate. It might be something that it's hard to do a straight retelling of a horror comic. That said, it has been done, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. But for the most part, I do seem to find horror comic book movies to stray from or take liberties with their source material. And in fact, that's how we're going to organize them today. As usual, we're going to go through all these movies in the undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level organization. And in this case, the rankings will be in order of how much they adhere to their source material, with the undergraduate being the farthest away from the source material, and the postgraduate being the closest to the source material. So with that, let's dig into these movies. The first movie that we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is From Hell. From Hell came out in 2001. It's an adaptation of the comic book of the same name, written by comic book legend Alan Moore and drawn by Eddie Campbell. If you're not familiar with it, the story is a fictionalized but extremely well researched telling of the investigation into the Jack the Ripper killings in Whitechapel in the 1800s. And it stars Johnny Depp and Heather Graham. Johnny Depp is an investigator and Heather Graham is a prostitute, afraid of Jack the Ripper out there preying on prostitutes. And while it does follow the facts of the story, it takes some creative licenses in offering up a solution to the mystery. And we'll stop there, of course, because I don't like to spoil things, but I would say that From Hell, the movie, is a fun ride, especially if you like Jack the Ripper stories. But the book that it's based on, the graphic novel, is phenomenal. As I mentioned, Alan Moore is considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, comic book writer of all time. He's made many seminal works, including Watchmen and V for Vendetta, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and he wrote From Hell. Notoriously, most of his comic book works have turned into movies that he's not tremendously satisfied with, and From Hell is no exception to the rule. And in this case, I kind of understand why. The movie falls short as an adaptation of the book. The book is incredibly rich with detail, both historical facts and just nuances of character and themes and mood that the movie, by and large, doesn't manage to capture. the movie tells the narrative straight, and it gets the bones of the story correct. What is in Alan Moore's book is in the movie, but it's very thin. It's like this, like I said, it's the bones with a lot of the meat missing. What does work for the movie is the cast, led by Johnny Depp and Heather Graham and a few other recognizable names. The cast does give great performances, and it helps ground the movie a bit. It makes it entertaining to watch, and makes it you buy into it a little bit more, even though it's going to get a little fantastical, a little bit. Like I said, the story takes liberties with the facts, and you're either going to be with it or you're not. But I think the actors help keep you with it. The movie's directed by the Hughes brothers, and they are serviceable directors. I've seen some of their other movies. Menace to Society jumps to mind. Dead Presidents, and they are not bad directors by any stretch of the imagination. But I would not call them visionaries necessarily, or auteurs. And this movie it doesn't change my opinion of that at all. It looks fine. It looks good. It's got a little bit of style to it, but not a ton. It's got a little bit of mood to it, but not a ton. I do think that they could have ratcheted this up a little bit and really given the movie a lot more heavy tone, a lot more mood. If you've read the Alan Moore book, which I highly, highly recommend, you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, there's a certain mood that permeates that book on a printed page with illustrations that are in black and white, that really conveys this sense of unsettled dread that I don't think the movie ever quite captures. As a result, the movie feels a little bit more like a mystery than a horror film. It's got some horrific elements to it, but for the most part, you get more of a mystery tale to that, which is not a bad thing. I actually like the movie quite a bit. I do like mysteries. I was able to separate the work, the Alan Moore work, from this work, which is key. If you've read Alan Moore's book and you love it, the odds of you liking this are greatly diminished, and that's why I think it got poor critical reception, poor audience reception. People did not feel that it lived up to the book. I feel like it didn't live up to the book, but it doesn't matter so much. On its own, it's perfectly entertaining, perfectly fine. Now, I've mentioned this before. I am a bit of an easy sell when it comes to Jack the Ripper stories, so I'm a little predisposed to like this one already. But I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's fun. I like Johnny Depp in the role. I like Heather Graham. I like all the acting. And like I said, the directing is good enough. It's not amazing, but it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. The movie moves at a pretty good clip. I never feel bored. I feel engaged. I'm interested in the story. It's just that the book is so much better. I mean, it's so intricately researched. It's got footnotes at the end to explain where all the theories came from. It's a dense read. It's a Herculean task to take it on, but it's well worth it, especially if you like Jack the Ripper stories. You have to check out the book. As for the movie, like I said, it's if you like Jack the Ripper, if you like this kind of stuff, I think you might have a good time. If you're a big fan of the book, you probably won't have that good of a time. So that's my caveat to it. If you've seen From Hell and you have thoughts on it, please share them in the comments. If you've read the book, please share your comments about that too, because I've yet to meet somebody who read that book and didn't love it. And I definitely love it. So I'd love to have a conversation about that in the comments as well. And I think we'll be talking about comic books as well as movies in this video quite a bit, obviously, given the subject matter. So feel free to share your thoughts on both in the comments. The next movie that we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Blade. Blade came out in 1998 and was Marvel Cinematic Universe before the term Marvel Cinematic Universe was even a thing. If you're not familiar with it, the movie stars Wesley Snipes as a vampire, a human vampire hybrid that has all of the vampire strengths and none of the weaknesses, which is pretty convenient. And he spends his life dedicating himself to hunting and destroying vampires. And hijinks abound as he gets into adventures. And we'll leave it at that in case you haven't seen it. But the Blade movies are tremendously fun. They're very action packed, but they still have a lot of scariness to them because the vampires are actually done rather well. In the first movie, you've got Stephen Dorff playing the head vampire, and he's chewing scenery. He's a lot of fun in the movie. You've got Chris Christopherson as a kind of a guru helping out Wesley Snipes' Blade as he on his mission to kill all the vampires, and he brings a lot of fun to the movie. He's a little bit of comic relief, and he's also just a little bit of a sidekick, welcome influence on the character and in the movie. It's a breath of fresh air. It really works rather well. It's before the Marvel Cinematic Universe was a thing and before they had their formula down, even though it kind of follows that formula a little bit, but it works extremely well. Now, as I mentioned, Stephen Dorff is the villain in the first movie, indicating that there are other movies. There's actually 3 Blade movies that star Wesley Snipes, and as the time of this recording, they are looking at doing a reboot starring Mahershala Ali, which would be awesome because he's awesome, and that'll actually fit into the MCU proper. As it stands, these 3 movies with Wesley Snipes stand outside of the MCU. They're not part of that continuity, but that's okay because it's giving these movies the freedom to operate without having to connect to a larger story, without having to connect to the Avengers, say, or Doctor Strange or something like that. The movie is dark. The whole series is dark. The concept of it is pretty dark, but it really leans more into action. In fact, I could have put this in the horror action subgenre easily and thought about it, but it really is a comic book movie. It is based on the character Blade from Marvel Comics, which Blade was really prominent in the 1970s and then kind of died down for a while, but then made a resurgence in the 90s, probably in part because of this movie. And the character in the comics, I'm not super familiar with it. I've read some Blade comics and stuff, comics that Blade is in, and he's kind of a fun character, but he's always been in a kind of an ancillary character in other books for the most part. And he had his own book a little for a while, I think. But I'm not a super familiar with the source material, other than I know that he was in the 1970s and he was based on like 1970s blaxploitation stars, guys like Jim Brown, for example, and he kind of talked jive and kind of had those stereotypes and had 70s look to him and everything like that, which has obviously all been updated for the movie. So in that sense, it's not very true to the character from an aesthetic standpoint. But from a tone standpoint, it actually gets it pretty right. He's got an attitude. He's got a bit of edge, a bit of sass to him. He's cool. He's got a very cool and hip vibe to him. Again, updated for the 90s as opposed to a 70s style, which honestly, I would have really liked to have seen a 70s style Blade. A period piece would have been a lot of fun. But it was probably the right idea to update the character, and I think it works rather well. So I do think that it ties into the comic books rather well, which is interesting because the movies are written by David S. Goyer, and I believe he directed the third movie. And Goyer's name may sound familiar to you if you're fans of things like the Dark Knight trilogy, because he helped Christopher Nolan write that. And I want to point out that he helped Christopher Nolan write that because he gets a lot of credit and a lot of shine for writing the Dark Knight trilogy, but he's also written some really bad comic book adaptations. So do yourself a favor and look him up on IMDb and see some of the junk that he's responsible for. He's a little overrated, and that's putting it mildly, but he does seem to get it mostly right here. The first movie is fun. It's got a pretty good story. Special effects are a little dodgy, the CGI, a little bit dated, not looking great. Honestly, probably didn't look super great back at the time, and that's kind of true maybe for the whole series. But the second movie is directed by Guillermo del Toro, and actually, honestly, I should probably put the second movie on the list rather than the first, but I'm kind of putting the entire franchise, if you will, because the second movie is arguably better than the first movie. Guillermo del Toro, I'm sure you're familiar with the name. I've talked about him before. He is a masterful director, a wonderful visual storyteller, and he knows monsters. And the vampires in the second movie are downright unsettling, very creepy, kind of Predator-esque, and really great character design. And that movie probably is better than the first one. And then the third movie isn't quite as popular. Again, directed by David S. Goyer, so maybe that has something to do with it. I do like it quite a bit. It's got Ryan Reynolds, got Jessica Biel, who I like a lot. It's fun. It's a fun movie, but it's not as good as the second one, and so it kind of feels like a letdown to a lot of people. But I would recommend all 3 of these movies if you've never seen them before, especially if you like vampire movies. These are fun vampire movies. They're more in the world of they're more in the vein of like Underworld than say Dracula, but they're a tremendous amount of fun. There was also a TV series of Blade that didn't star Wesley Snipes. It was Sticky Fingers playing Blade, and it's cheesy, but I kind of love it. So if you really like Blade, I would also say check out the series, but you got to really love Blade or love really campy stuff. It's not trying to be campy, but it's a low budget, cable TV version of Blade that doesn't really have the money or talent behind it to be actually good. But that original trilogy of movies is good. It's really a lot of fun. It knows what it wants to be. It's sitting its tone just right. It's mostly serious and action packed with just a sprinkling of humor in there. It gets the tone right. Like I said, the special effects, you got to give it a little bit of a pass. It's a little bit dated, but otherwise, I think it holds up extremely well. And if you, like I said, if you like vampires, or if you like comic books, if you like Marvel comics, if you like Wesley Snipes, for any of those reasons, check out these movies because they are a blast. And the last movie that we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is The Crow. The Crow came out in 1994 and is maybe one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. Not just horror comic book movies, but any comic book movie. I have a lot of love for the movie. I have a lot of love for the source material, so it's kind of a special one to me. If you're not familiar with it, the story is pretty simple. It's a dead musician rises from the grave to seek vengeance on the people that killed him and his girlfriend a year prior. And the movie follows his revenge spree, if you will, culminating in a big final fight, as comic book movies tend to do. But we won't go into the details too much to not spoil it. Suffice to say, The Crow is something of a cult hit. It was a mild success at the box office, but it really the people who are fans of it are devoted fans of it, and for a good reason. The movie is well made, and as noted by the fact that it's in our postgraduate level slot, it tends to really be very faithful to the subject matter, not just in terms of storyline, because the particulars of the story are different from the book, but rather in terms of tone and mood and theme. It really captures that extremely well, but kind of by accident. See, for those of you that don't know, the star of The Crow was Brandon Lee. It was Bruce Lee's son, by the way. Bruce Lee, famous martial artist and actor. And Brandon Lee was making a name for himself in Hollywood as his own man. And The Crow was going to be his breakout role. And tragically, it was. Unfortunately, he died during the filming of the movie in a shooting accident, a gun accident on set. And he died on the set. He was engaged to be married. In fact, the movie is dedicated to him and his fiancee Eliza. It's a really tragic story, which feeds into the story from both the comic book and the movie. The comic book was written by a man named James O'Barr, and he wrote it as almost like therapy to work out the demons from his wife dying in I think it was a drunk driving car accident. And so The Crow was his catharsis. It was his way of kind of dealing with the anger and pain that he had from that loss. And then the movie winds up losing Brandon Lee, so that feeling of loss gets transferred not just from the work, from James O'Barr's work to the screen, but from the screen to the audience who is aware of that loss. When the movie came out, it was famous for having been completed after Brandon Lee had died. So they weren't completely finished with the movie. And they used then cutting edge CGI technology and body doubles to finish the movie. And it worked out rather well, even though they had to cut a lot of things and do like a lot of last minute changes. Hence why the movie doesn't really fully follow the storyline, the narrative of the book, because they had to make some last minute changes to accommodate the fact that their star was gone. But the audience knew this going in. When the movie came out, everybody was very well aware of the accident and the loss of Brandon Lee. And it made the movie that much more poignant. There are things in this movie that are haunting, things that the character of Eric Draven, who's the main character played by Brandon Lee, things that he says, things that happen in the movie that hit harder because of the reality of what happened. And it's a big part of why I love the movie, and a big part of why it's got such a cult following. Very, very effective, very, very sad, also very, very good. It's only compounded by the fact that Brandon Lee gives it a phenomenal performance in the movie. He is so incredibly good. Everybody in the movie is good. A lot of them are caricatures, playing larger than life, campy characters. David Patrick Kelly from Twin Peaks is in there. Michael Madsen. Tony Todd is in the movie. There's a lot of people like Ernie Hudson, and everybody's doing exactly what they should be doing in this movie. The performances are fun across the board, but Brandon Lee shines through. I do believe this would have been his breakthrough role because he was phenomenal in it. There's rumors that he was being considered for Spider-Man. They were trying to make a Spider-Man movie at the time, and obviously that didn't happen for a number of reasons, not the least of which is he died. But I genuinely think he would have been a big star. He has charisma for days. He's good looking. He's got the physicality, and he really connected with this character. And again, it's only enhanced by the fact that he passed away. That performance is haunting, if you will. Now they have franchised this movie out, and the franchise gets away from the source material quite a bit. The sequels are progressively worse. If I'm being honest with you, I actually like the second one quite a bit, but they get worse as they go on, or less necessary, maybe a better way. They're not so much bad, so much as they're just completely unnecessary. It doesn't feel like anything other than kind of a cash grab or milking a dry cow. They're not really worth your time, but the original is. There was also a cable TV series of this, kind of like the Blade series I was talking about. There was a cable TV series of The Crow that is more like the first movie, and it stars Mark Dacascos as Eric Draven instead of Brandon Lee. And I love Mark Dacascos, so that's a lot of fun. Some of you might be familiar with him from the third John Wick movie. But he's a tremendous amount of fun. He's a good actor, and he's a really good martial artist. But it's a very light version of The Crow. If The Crow seems too dark for you or too morose, the TV version might be for you. It's a really sanitized, lower budget, too well lit, not very dark version of The Crow that it's not trying to be campy. It's trying to be earnest, but I find it to be campy fun. I really enjoy it, but it's not particularly good. But I'd watch those over the sequels, to be honest with you. But for sure, the original movie is definitely worth your time. Even if it doesn't hit for you the same way it hits for me or for those of us that kind of grew up with this Brandon Lee tragedy, I still think it's a very effective and fun movie to watch, and I do think that the comic book itself, the graphic novel, is a work of art. Quite literally, the drawings in there are absolutely stunning. The different art styles for the different parts of the book to evoke different moods is absolutely amazing, and the story is heartbreaking, especially when you understand the tragedy that it's coming from. The book is a high recommend from me. I absolutely love it. The movie is also a high recommend for me. I love that too. And while they're not, like I said, not completely mirror opposites or mirror images of each other, they are capturing that same theme of like loss and sadness and anger and tragedy really, really well. So The Crow is definitely one that you should check out if you haven't seen it already. And if you have seen it, let us know what you think of it in the comments below. Am I being a little too effusive about it, or do you have the same kind of love and passion for it that I do? So that's going to do it for our exploration into horror comic book movies, but we've got a few extra credit movies we want to talk about too. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of really great comic book horror movies, but the ones that get it right, I feel like they get it right pretty well. Now, to be fair, maybe I'm giving things a little bit of a pass. I tend to be more accepting of things than most. I don't look at things with too harsh of a critical eye. So, with that caveat, let's talk about some other movies that I think are worth your time. The first one is Tales from the Crypt, which came out in 1972. And it's an adaptation of the EC Comics Tales from the Crypt, which was a horror comic back in the day that still comes out, has endured for years and years and years, actually. And if you're not familiar with the movie, if you haven't seen it, it's an anthology movie. It has a bunch of different people that come together with a crypt keeper, a mysterious man who tells them stories about their lives that wind up being spooky little anecdotes or little anthology entries that kind of come together around a loosely based common theme. And I won't spoil the details of it, of course, but it's a lot of fun. If you like anthology movies, which I do, this is a pretty good one. It's 1972, so it's got a little bit of that dated feeling to it. And it's worth noting that the Crypt Keeper in this movie is not the Crypt Keeper that you might be thinking of. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you're thinking of the Crypt Keeper from the HBO series Tales from the Crypt, the skeleton-looking guy that laughs a lot and cracks puns. This guy's just like a human being in a robe, and he's fine. He's fine, but I do miss that Crypt Keeper, and so I would like to just take a moment to mention the entire Tales from the Crypt franchise, not just this 1972 movie, which I think is good, but also the the 7 season HBO series that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, which is fantastic. I really love it. And it had a couple of spin-off movies, most notable of which was Demon Knight, which I honestly could have just as easily put here because Demon Knight's a lot of fun. The other sequels, not as much, but if you like these kind of tales of morality, like ironic morality, Twilight Zone esque type tales, Tales from the Crypt is going to be your bag. Both the this 1972 movie and the HBO miniseries with its movie spin-offs. I think you would enjoy all of it. I do very much, and I know it's got a lot of fans. It's a popularity that has endured to this day. People really like Tales from the Crypt, and there's a good reason why. It's a lot of fun. It's not scary so much as it's kind of just ironic and twisted. Maybe a little bit scary, but not too scary. So it's a good one. Like I said, I watched this as a kid, and I think a lot of kids can like it. Maybe older kids like preteen to teen can get into this stuff a little bit because it's gleefully fun horror rather than trying to be gruesome or too dark. So if that's your bag, if you like that kind of horror, definitely check out Tales from the Crypt. The second extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Constantine. Constantine came out in 2005 and stars Keanu Reeves in an admittedly miscast role as shady magician John Constantine, or Constantine, depending on where you're from. And he basically fights demons and he tries to exorcise demons that are possessing people. And I won't go into the details too much. Suffice to say that I like the movie. I like Keanu Reeves, even though he's wrong for the role. I love the comic. The comic Hellblazer, which is what the movie is based on, is starring John Constantine as this kind of mysterious and dark magician who gets into adventures and fights demons, and he's kind of sardonic and edgy and British and blonde, which is why you can see Keanu Reeves not quite fitting the bill for this one. But I have a lot of love for the books, and the movie isn't true to the books in a lot of ways, not the least of which is Keanu Reeves, but it does have some of the cool story aspects, some of the best story beats from the comic book run, which was several years long. So I have love for it in that sense, and I just love the fact that somebody tried to make Hellblazer into a movie. I do wish it was a little bit better, but I enjoy it for what it is. I think the acting is good. Even Keanu's good in it. He's just not right for the role. Peter Stormare and Tilda Swinton. Like, there's good people. Rachel Weisz. There's good people in the movie. It's better than you think it would be. But if you are a diehard Hellblazer fan, John Constantine fan, you're going to be disappointed. If you wanted a more accurate version of John Constantine, there was a Constantine TV show that came out, and I think the character's now on the DC's Legends of Tomorrow show. And that character nails it. That's Matt Ryan, I think, who's playing him. Nails the character. He's dead on perfect for the role. But those shows aren't as dark as the movie was. So the movie really captured the darkness of it pretty well. I kind of wish they would revisit it. I kind of wish Matt Ryan would get a chance to do a movie on that. But I do think the movie is a lot of fun. And if you like the movie, definitely check out the book or the series of books because they're great. They're absolutely fantastic. And the last movie that we're going to talk about for extra credit today is called The Empty Man. And The Empty Man came out very recently in 2020 and was a extremely late addition to this video. I just squeezed it on here and bumped something else off because I wanted to talk about The Empty Man. If you're not familiar with it, and many of you aren't, The Empty Man is the story of a girl that goes missing and this ex-cop who's like a friend of her family's who goes and starts investigating into it and finding out that, I don't want to say too much about it, but finding out that there's a lot more going on than just like a straight missing persons case. We'll just leave it at that because I don't want to spoil it for you. I feel like maybe the less you know about this movie, the better, because what's interesting about it is that it really goes into some weird places. It is not the most straightforward of narratives. It's one of those movies that really makes you think, and I like those. I like those movies that make me think even days later, that keep rattling around in my brain, and this is definitely one of them. It doesn't spoon feed things too much, and it really is trying to say something deeper. I'm not sure if it's successful. The movie's really long. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes long, and probably would benefit from being a little shorter. But it's got big ideas. It's got really big ideas that it's trying to communicate, trying to expand on, and I don't know for sure that it really succeeds. I think opinions vary on this because it was not a critical or commercial success when it hit theaters, but it seems to be developing a bit of a cult following. I think people are starting to recognize that there's some interesting things about this movie. I like it for its ambition. I think that it swung for the fences and maybe didn't quite hit the home run, but it still ended up being a very interesting movie. Again, it feels a little long, it's a little bit slow, and I'm not 100% sure that it completely pays off because at the end of the movie, you might be feeling like, I don't exactly know what happened. But if you stop and think about it, there's a couple of different interpretations, and that's what I like about it. I like that there are different ways you can interpret that movie and determine what it is you just saw. It's a challenging film. It doesn't make it doesn't talk down to its audience or treat the audience as unsophisticated. It's trying for something big, and I appreciate that. I really do. It's based on a graphic novel of the same name or a comic book series, I think, of the same name that I've never read. I tried to do a little research on it, and there's not a whole lot about it. I could go pick it up and read it, but I haven't had a chance to. But frankly, what I've read about it sounds like it's vastly different from the movie. It kind of has to do with more like a virus that's breaking out and stuff like that. Really, very, very, very different from the movie. The movie seems to have just kind of picked points a few plot points or ideas or themes from the comic and kind of run with them, which I think is interesting. But yeah, I don't know. Again, I haven't read the comic, so I can't really say for sure which is better or anything like that. But I kind of feel like the movie probably has something more interesting to say than the comic. Just my suspicion. The movie really, like I said, really is an interesting and challenging watch. It's not going to be for everybody. I'm going to recommend it here for people who have some patience and like to kind of try to solve the puzzle mystery. It for large parts of the movie feels more like a mystery than a horror movie, and that's both a good and a bad thing. Again, try not to spoil things too much because I think the less you know about the movie going in, the more interesting it's going to be as you try to suss it out. So if you haven't seen it, give it a chance and let me know what you think. And if you have seen it, let me know your opinion on it. Like I said, I think I like it, but I'm not 100% sure that I like it, which I know is a weird thing to say. So I'd like to know what you guys think. If you like it, let me know. And if you didn't like it, let me know why. But I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. So that's going to do it for today's video. I appreciate you indulging me because I do love comic books. I like comic books since I was a little boy, probably even more so than, well, no, not more so than horror movies, but it'd be an interesting conversation. I have more comic books than DVDs, let me put it that way. Thanks again for letting me kind of go through and tell you what I love about comic book horror movies. And I'm hoping that you'll share in the comments below some of the movies that I haven't missed. I know I left a few on the table. I know there's a few that I didn't mention that deserve to be mentioned here. So please, by all means, bring them up in the comments below. Tell all of us what we're missing. With that, thank you guys for your attention and looking forward to seeing you guys next week. Until then, class dismissed.